Hello, welcome to Reel Film Snobs. I'm Angela Yeager. I'm pleased to have with me for this special episode Autumn Edwards back on the show. Welcome, Autumn.
Hello, thank you for having me, Angela.
Hello. We are here. It's here. We missed last year. We did not do a best of the year last year, but Autumn has graciously agreed to come on the show to do the best films of 2024 with me this year. So this is your first time doing the big one, as I like to call it. And 2024 was a great year for movies. It wasn't a great year for much of anything else, but it was a great year for movies. And I'm very excited. I had 24. I know, I went a little nutso. 24 four-star movies. So I really had a hard time paring it down. And in some cases, these were choices based on not this being the actually in the top 10 in terms of any more than stuff that was my 11 through 20, but films I wanted to highlight because I felt like they were underseen or under, a lot of people. I felt like I wanted to get the word out more about some of these movies. So I'll just launch it off with my number 10 because we got a lot to do. We're going to do our 10 through 6 on this episode, and then stay tuned because in 2 weeks after you see this, our numbers 1 through 5 will be on there. So my number 10 film is A Different Man by Aaron Schimberg. It is a dark comedy written and directed by Aaron Schimberg, who himself has some disabilities and medical conditions as a filmmaker. It stars Sebastian Stan in a performance I think should have been nominated instead of, he was nominated but for the wrong movie, as a socially awkward, struggling actor who has fibromatosis. So it's a disfiguring facial condition. And because of through a series of different things that happen to him, he ends up getting a fix, so we say, and he becomes a different man, at least physically. And his life has changed. He becomes very successful. But then a man comes on the scene named Edmund, who has the exact same condition that he has, and seems to be just okay with the way he looks. And this starts to really disquiet and upset Edward. So I think this movie is a dark comedy. I loved it for a lot of reasons. It was compared in some ways to The Substance, and I think it's a far superior film to that in terms of one that focuses on, how we view ourselves through appearance and that lens. It's unlike The Substance, it doesn't beat you over the head multiple times per minute with the same knocks. It has more layers and more interest to it. And particularly, I wanted to highlight the fact that the filmmaker himself has multiple medical conditions and disabilities, and these are issues he struggles with, and so he's putting that on screen. He previously worked with the actor Adam Pearson, who plays Edmund, the confident man who has the facial disfigurement, in another film, and he's like that in real life. He's charming, he's witty, he doesn't let it get him down, and he thought, how do you be like that when you look the way we do? And so I think that was really interesting thing to explore. And of course, as someone with a disability myself, there's so few films made about people with disabilities that it was refreshing to see it done, especially in an interesting, not hokey way.
hmm Yeah, I thought it was a wonderful film too. I really liked, of course, the dark comedy elements. I thought it was very funny throughout. But I also really like the way that it shifts through many different registers throughout the film. Like it's, both a dark comedy and a drama, and then by the end it keeps getting weirder and weirder in a good way. I really appreciated just like the strange arc that it takes. It's a movie that's not afraid to take big swings, and I feel like they all pay off in a good way here. And like you said, I think Adam Pearson was great. Sebastian Stan was fantastic. Like they're both wonderful actors and they play off each other really, really well. And I think it's a great story about how we value ourselves, like you said, and how even if you change your appearance, as much as you want, you're still going to be the person that you are on the inside. And
Yeah.
as a trans person, that resonates with me for sure, right? Like I am who I am regardless of how I look like. And so I really appreciated that aspect. And I thought it was well shot too. And I really liked the soundtrack as well. It has
Yeah.
kind of an experimental, like jazzy, kind of soundtrack to it. I'm not very musical, so I don't know how to describe very
I
well,
actually
but
said in my original Letterboxd review, I thought it was one of the best scores of the year as well. I also really
mhm.
liked it. It wasn't typical in any way. So
Yeah, I really, really appreciated it. So,
good. I'm glad you liked it. So your
mhm.
number 10.
Yeah, so my number 10 was Juror number 2, directed by
Oh,
Clint Eastwood. Juror number 2 is the story of a man who's called for jury duty, and big spoiler alert here, finds that he may have actually been the one that committed the crime. So he's an expectant father and a recovering alcoholic, and he's just having a crisis of consciousness as he, reels back and forth between wanting to do the right thing and doing what is best for his family. So I just thought it was a great movie. I like Clint Eastwood stuff generally, and I think this is one of his stronger later years films. I thought just a wonderful exploration of like morality, responsibility, and the I thought it was really well explored the way, the struggle, right, between wanting to do the right thing and what's best for yourself. And it was very easy to put myself in his position and question like, would I be able to do the right thing here? Because I think we'd all like to say that yes, like we would, fess up and what have you, but it's a lot harder in reality, especially when he didn't even know that he had done it at the time. So it really feels like just kind of an unfair, cosmic consequence
mhm.
to things. And so I just really appreciated like the moral grappling that was going on with it.
Yeah, it's interesting to follow this up with a different man because it felt like it was like kind of like the year of There's like a few actors that seem to be in everything, and Nicholas Hoult was one of those who plays the main character
Mhm.
in Juror number 2. He was also in Nosferatu, and I think at least one other film. Oh yeah, The Order, which you and I saw together with Jude Law. He was also in that one, playing a Nazi. So it's like,
Yeah.
wow, this
He's got
guy.
range.
Yeah, he's got range and he's great in this film. I thought he
Yeah.
really holds it together because you have to sympathize with his character or else this is not going to work. And the fact that the person who's on trial for the crime is not a great person is a really
Mhm.
kind of a nasty guy actually, and maybe just and happened to not have committed the crime also lends that moral credence to it there because here you have this quote unquote good guy who actually did the thing, but he has a wife, an upcoming baby. He's turned his life around, like you don't want him to go to jail. But on the other hand, you're like, okay, but the wrong person is being tried for this crime. Like there's a miscarriage of justice. So I think that kind of philosophical inquiry that Clint Eastwood's doing here, I think is really, really good. It didn't make my top 10. I really wish I could have seen this movie in a theater because I just
Mhm.
feel like even though it's, nothing flashy happening on screen. He has such good composed shots. It would just been really nice to see it on the big screen. I think Warner Brothers really goofed up the release of this film, but great to see Clint Eastwood doing such fine work towards the tail. I mean, I will say at the tail end of his career. I think that's obvious. He's in his 90s, so
Mhm.
yeah. So good, really good
Yeah.
choice. Okay, we'll move on to my number 9 film, which is His Three Daughters by director Azazel Jacobs. Now, this came out, I believe it came out at Sundance or Telluride. I'm not sure which, but it was three of my favorite female performances of the years, and none of them got nominated for Oscars, which is a crime. Carrie Coon, Natasha Lyonne, and Elizabeth Olsen play three sisters who come back together to care for their ailing father. The whole film takes place in one apartment in New York, and they actually shot it in a New York apartment on the sixth floor, so he was limited in terms of light and all that, and it was shot on film. Azazel Jacobs is a director I've admired for a while. His film Terry was in my top 10 list of 2011, but he makes films pretty sporadically. And this one really took me by surprise because it's nothing like his previous films. For one, it's focused on women. And I almost wondered if the women, it felt so authentic to me. I saw this in the theater here in Salem with my spouse, and I cried throughout the entire movie. I think being one of three sisters was probably part of the reason for that. So maybe if you don't have sisters, this movie doesn't register as heavily for you, or if you don't have siblings that you at times are maybe not on the same wavelength with, maybe it wouldn't register. But for me, this registered really great. And Natasha Lyonne should have been nominated. She's just, all three of the women are great, but Natasha Lyonne blew me away in this movie. She's just fantastic. So,
Yeah, I wish I would have had the chance to see that. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to get around to it in time for this episode, but I'll definitely be checking it out when I get a chance.
Yeah, I know
Um,
there's some of yours I haven't seen too, so that's
yeah.
what makes this fun, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, I love movies though that are set in like one location like that. I think that, always is an interesting challenge filming things like that and trying to make it, look visually interesting when you're just in one setting the whole time. And I'm a big fan of Natasha Lyonne, so it's a good selling point for sure. Yeah.
yeah, big time.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
no, yours.
yeah, so my number nine was Furiosa, directed by George Miller.
Uh,
Furiosa is the latest entry in the Mad Max universe, this time an origin story for the character Furiosa, which we last saw as one of the protagonists from Fury Road. And it follows her from the time that she's a child when she's abducted from the green place of many mothers and then adopted by Dementis, played by Chris Hemsworth, and I should mention Furiosa here is played by Anya Taylor-Joy, so we're switching it up from the Charlize Theron casting. But she eventually rebels and ultimately, spoiler alert, right, it leads right into Fury Road, so she becomes the character that we know and love from there. And I just thought it was super fun. It's a very different register from Fury Road, which I do appreciate. I like that George Miller is willing to like experiment, even within this universe that feels, despite all these changes, it's still very consistent. You still have the great set pieces with the wild car chases and everything. You still have these fantastically interesting characters. It's still, this beautiful desert scenery. I feel like it's a lot lighter in a way. It feels, certainly more like cartoony than something like Fury Road. But I just, I'm grateful to dip my toes back into that universe, and I had a lot of fun with this one.
yeah.
So what did you think?
Well, did we see this together? I can't remember.
I don't know that we
No, I
did.
don't think so. I think I
Yeah.
saw it with Brian. I don't like these movies in general as much as you and Brian do. And so, I liked Fury Road better than this movie, so I gave this one 3.5. But that said, I really liked it still. I liked it. I think for me, it felt a bit long, and some of the Chris Hemsworth character, and I think I've told you this all before, but like the audience hasn't heard this. Just registered like he got a lot more lines than Furiosa, and it bothered me. I also was I don't love Anya Taylor-Joy as much as some people do. I thought she was fine in terms of the casting, but I missed Charlize. She's just such a strong actress that I missed her presence in this film, or something equivalent to that in terms of acting. Anya Taylor-Joy does a great job acting with her eyes in this film, which
Hmm.
she has those huge eyes, so they make good use of that. But I just wanted a meatier character. I wanted her character to
Yeah.
have more going on, and than she did. So
I totally
I,
understand that. I feel like she did a good job with the voice though, kind of approximating Charlize's voice, considering, she's not Charlize. But I do think that she is missing an element of that physicality that Charlize brings. Like Charlize is her figure, she feels a lot more, sturdy and like she has kind of this just a strength to her that I think
yeah.
with Anya Taylor-Joy, I have a little bit of a harder time, believing that she's this, hardcore badass
Yeah,
character
there's
or
a scene in
whatnot.
the truck where she's doing these big muscle pulls and these things, Charlize just would pull that off. I mean, Anya Taylor-Joy, her arms look like they're about to snap off. In fact, a few times I was like, oh, that looks like that might be hurting her. She's so little and petite and not muscular or sturdy looking, as you said. It's not just the fact she's thin, it's the type of thing. She's like that wayfish supermodel type thing where she looks like,
Hmm.
she needs to eat a cheeseburger or something. So anyway, well, but yeah, still a good time at the movies, and one of the best movies, like visually, to see on the big screen, I think, this
Hmm.
year. So we'll move on to my number 8 film, which is Nickel Boys, which luckily we saw just in time to get it into this episode, directed by Ramell Ross. It is based on the 2019 novel The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead, and it follows two African American boys, Elwood and Turner, who are sent to this reform school in 1960s Florida. The film is inspired by a real, now closed, thankfully, Florida reform school notorious for its abusive treatment of black students. What this film does so well and so interestingly is it takes a story set during the civil rights era of abuse of black people, which we've seen lots of movies of those of different kinds, and it puts it squarely in the perspective and point of view of the character. Some people might be bothered by this. I wasn't sure going in if I was going to love it, but I actually did love it. We see the movie, particularly in the first half, from Elwood's perspective. So you're literally seeing things through the eyes of the main character. So no longer is that separation between, for instance, black abuse and black suffering. We are seeing everything through his eyes, and that made it to me much more powerful and profound. The photography is fantastic, and I have to give a shout out for Anjanou Ellis Taylor, who plays Nana, a great actress who was also fantastic in last 2023's movie Origin. She should have been nominated for supporting actress, in my opinion, for her role in this film. She continues to be a great actress that I look forward to seeing in many movies. So curious
Yeah.
what you thought about this one.
I totally agree. I was blown away by this film. I thought it was fantastic on every level, beautifully shot, like you said, some incredible performances. And I do think that formal conceit of the POV shooting works surprisingly well. It's very easy for that to go awry and make the audience motion sick or just feel, not connected to it. But it works really, really well here, and thematically, it supports the whole thing. I really liked the way that, it kind of just felt like this was a microcosm of everything that we're, experiencing as a society and everything, as a whole. Like everything you see here, all the abuses of power, the power dynamics and everything just being completely askew. It's all as relevant, today as it was in 1962, in which the story's set. And like you said, I appreciate that it didn't really focus entirely on the black suffering, as it were, because like you said, we've seen plenty of that, and it's very easy to just use that as a cheap gimmick to you know, add some realness or what have you, some sort of right, people react very strongly to depictions of abuse, and so I just think it's masterful the way that they allied that while still intimating all of it and letting you, the audience, feel those injustices. But at the same time, it's got just as much joy in it, right? I really appreciate just
Yeah.
the beginning sequence where it's just many, many shots of black joy, and it's just super wonderful. It feels like a very well-rounded movie in that regard. So I really, really enjoyed this one as well. Yeah.
Great.
And then,
Okay.
so my number eight was Girls Will Be Girls, directed by Shuchi Talati. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, but Girls Will Be Girls is the story of a young girl named Mira who becomes the first girl to be appointed head prefect at her boarding school. It's a very sweet coming-of-age film that touches on friendships and relationships of all kind, particularly romantic and mother-daughter relationships. I really appreciated the way that this movie, it felt very on the level with its, protagonist, as far as it's very easy to infantilize children when you're making movies about them. But I felt like this one was just very true to the experience of growing up as a child there, and particularly in India with, the patriarchy is very strong there. There's a lot of gender disparity there, and so I think it touches on those issues really well. And I really, really liked the dynamic between the mother and the daughter. I thought the mother, who's played by Connie Khosrow, who is also the star of All We Imagine as Light, I believe is what it's called. She's a great actress. She's super fun in this. I felt like, watching this as Mira as a typical teenage girl kind of rebelling against her mother, and I'm just watching it and I'm like, oh, you're gonna regret that when you're older. Your mom's actually pretty cool.
Hmm.
I just thought there's some great nuance here, and I love the relationship even that the mom develops with her, romantic partner that she eventually finds and everything. I just thought really the character dynamics is what makes this movie for me, and it's really well shot as well.
It's
So
beautiful. Of course, it's set
yeah.
in the Himalayan foothills, so it's kind of a striking photography. Yes, I love this film. This is actually would be just a good segue to my number seven film, which is Girls Will Be Girls by director Shuchi Talati. And she wrote and directed it. And I have to say, first time film. So it blew me away just knowing that. Actually had several this year of films that were by first time filmmakers or first time to me, very early in their career filmmakers that blew me away. And as you said, the acting, coming of age stories is one of my favorite genres, and it's so easily to make it formulaic. And this one was not. It took me to places I was not expecting. Mira is this really super high achieving academic girl, but like a lot of teens, she starts to have a sexual awakening, and so this boy that she sees just all of a sudden gets her going, and then now all of a sudden her mom is intervening, and of course that would be annoying. But her mother is such a complex character, and that's what I liked about it. We never get to see that usually. It's just like, oh, mom is annoying, or mom is horrible, or mom is absent in a coming of age story, or whatever parent figure you want to put in there, right? So, yeah, and as you mentioned, Connie Kazruti, fantastic actress who was also in All We Imagine Is Light. So, definitely one of my favorites of the year at my number seven. So,
Yeah, it's very sympathetic, I think, in the depiction of the mother, because even though she's, the antagonist towards Mira in some ways, it does obviously ultimately come from a place of love, and like it really dives into her character too and why she feels like that, which is another element of like the gender stuff in this film. So
yeah.
I thought it was fantastic. I
It
really
has some
enjoyed
dark
it.
elements, but
Yeah.
ultimately it's overall an uplifting film too. And you'll notice this year on my top 10 list, not everything's uplifting, not even close, but I did have a tendency, if there was a good comedy or something on the lighter side, to put it in there because I think we need a little bit of uplifting right now. And this
Mhm.
film lifted me up. It showed at Sundance in January of 2024 and then did not get to theatrical distribution and then just got thrown onto Amazon Prime. So it is available on Prime, but it never got a theatrical release, which kind of broke my heart because it was actually my favorite, my second favorite movie I saw at Sundance. The first one will be later on a different episode. So anyway, you're number seven.
So my number seven was I Saw the TV Glow, directed by Jane Schoenbrun.
Oh, this is so funny.
Um, I Saw the TV Glow is a psychological horror about two troubled high school students named Owen and Maddie who form a strong bond through their love of a strange TV show called The Pink Opaque. Maddie runs away from home to escape her abusive stepfather, and Owen is supposed to go with her, but decides not to at the last minute. Maddie eventually returns many years later, claiming that the world that they live in is essentially a construct, and the TV show is their real lives, and that they need to return. So I thought this was a wonderful film. One, it looks incredible. It's really, really well shot. I love the deeply saturated colors and like all the purples and pinks and blues that this movie sits in. You have some great performances all around, I think, and it's very clearly an analog for the trans experience. So, of course, it speaks to many trans people very deeply on that level. But I've also heard a lot of comments from non-trans people about how it spoke to them because really it's just about kind of feeling who you are and maybe not knowing entirely, but being afraid to like take the steps to actualize that person. And that's a
Hmm.
very relatable situation, I think, for just about everyone. We all have some idea of who we'd like to be, but are we there yet? And it is scary, making change because it's easy to be comfortable and, bury yourself, as it were, which is a very strong element in this film. But yeah, no,
Yeah.
I thought it was a great movie. I really like James Sean Brent stuff. We're All Going to the World's Fair was a fun, experimental, another deeply like trans related thing just because it's so online. But I just look forward to more of her movie or their movies. My apologies. I think they're a great director and this was a fun one.
Yeah. Well, so also, it's like you're just reading my mind here, Autumn. I'm just going to go right to my number six, which is I Saw the TV Glow. And to echo what you're saying, I actually, here's an interesting thing. I didn't like Jane Schoenbrun's previous film, We're All Going to the World's Fair. And I think it might be an age thing partially. I did not grow up online, and so I got very bored just watching people staring at computer screens during a movie. It's like watching someone stare at their phone for a whole movie. It's just very, very boring to me. And so I had a really hard time engaging with it because of the visuals, even though I thought the concept was really interesting. This film, though, I really liked, even though they are staring at a television, but that I could relate to, I guess. But also beyond that, this one has a lot more going on, I think, just visually. As you mentioned, it's just gorgeous looking, the use of pink, but also just the deeply saturated colors in general, especially during a time period where so many movies just have a washed out look to them and every movie looks gray or blue. So I loved that about it. I thought the performances were absolutely fantastic. The acting seemed to be way up from We're All Going to the World's Fair. And I think that, as you said, the themes were deeply resonant for me. Even though I'm not trans, I think that the grappling with your identity and who you are, especially during that critical time. Like I made a lot of major shifts in my life between high school and college and that whole period, and coming to realization of who you really are and what you want from life, all of that. So that is, big stuff to handle in a movie and make it entertaining and almost like in a genre film. It's a mixture of, I mean, they call it, I think, horror. I didn't find it horror as much as maybe thriller, but it's also at sometimes a little bit funny. So I think that's a hard thing to handle. So I'm looking
Sure.
forward to more of their films for sure.
Yeah. And they also handle like the fixation, right? I think like having the pink opaque as like this kind of anchor point for these two characters and everything is very relevant in this day and age, right? With the
Yeah.
prevalence of fandoms and everything, like people make the things that they love, particularly the media, like TV shows, movies, music, what have you. They make that kind of their personality. It ends up,
Yeah.
influencing them in
Oh,
a way
yeah.
that I
And the fact
think
it's set in the
would,
90s, right?
yeah.
I related with that part because when we were watching the Pink Opaque, yeah, it's cheesy, but I was like, oh, this is like a mixture of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and so many shows I saw in the 90s. It just made me think of that immediately. So I was like, oh,
Mhm.
yeah, this is totally, yeah, it was spot on that, I
I
thought.
also love like the practical effects. Like, since we're talking about the Pink Uptake, they have some fun monsters and everything in that show with
Right, right.
like the costumes and the practical effects that they used to bring them to life that were really, really well handled. So I
Yeah,
really appreciated that. Yeah. So your number six?
that was my number six.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I guess then we'll go to my number six.
Yes.
So my number six was Twilight of the Warriors,
Mm,
Walden, directed by Soi Cheang. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly. My apologies. But Twilight of the Warriors, Walden, is the story of a young man in Hong Kong who is cheated by Mr. Big, the head of the local crime syndicate, out of a fake ID and ends up stealing drugs from him as revenge. And on the run, he ends up in the notorious Kowloon walled city and encounters Cyclone, the local crime boss. He begins working for him and learning the ins and outs of the one-of-a-kind city, while old grudges bubble to the surface between Mr. Big and Cyclone. And I thought this was just a super fun movie. I really enjoyed everything
mm,
about it because I'm a big fan of martial arts films and action films like this. And it's just a total love letter to like some of the
yeah.
greats that, have done it in the past. Like Mr. Big is played by Sammo Hung, who's one of my favorite martial artists to ever exist. He's this very big guy, very literally. It's why he's called Mr. Big. But it's incredible the way that he can move. And it's really fun too, as like kind of the love letter because they're all aging now, right? These are stars.
Mm,
A lot of the older characters in this movie, they're stars that made their names and were like at the height of their physical prowess 30 years ago. And so to have another opportunity to like show off their skills and like, just be commemorated through this movie, I think was super wonderful. And I also really appreciated the setting. It's so unique. The Kowloon Walled City there's no other place like it in the world and it doesn't exist anymore. But I think it's wonderful that the way they recreated this. And I just think it's super fun to watch fights happen in a place like that.
in tight quarters. Yeah, I really liked this
Yeah.
one. I gave it 3.5, and I can't even remember. This is another one that I wish I'd seen on a big screen. Actually, just I watched it at home, so I wish I could have seen it even on your big screen versus like. But the theater would have been awesome on the biggest screen possible because it's so visual. And like you mentioned, the walled city that they recreate for this film looks fantastic. And all these fight sequences in very small, confined spaces. And I just loved that. And so it's definitely an action film, but it's like a historical, and it's set, I think, in the 80s, if I'm not
Mhm.
correct, towards the end at
I
least.
think so.
And there's the
Mhm.
bad guy is like one of my favorite villains I've seen in years. He's got this horribly, horribly awesome hair, 80s hair, and he's just such a great bad guy because he's also a really good fighter. He's not some dumb bad guy who can't fight. He's like really hard to beat. And so I
Mhm.
liked that about it because he kind of kicks everyone's butts and they're like, oh, what are we going to do? It literally takes like five of them to bring him down. So yeah, really fun action movie.
Mhm. All right. Does that
Okay,
wrap
well,
us
that was
up? Yeah.
okay. I guess that does. So that was our 10 through 6. You can find our picks on our website at reelfilmsnobs.com. We're also a link where you can find these on streaming if they are available. And of course, we're on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe and follow us there. Thank you to Autumn for joining me. As always, have a great day and great movies.
Bye.